Hello, everyone, and welcome. We're excited that so many of you could join us this evening for Race, Integration, and the Future of America. I'm Jason MacArthur, the Events Coordinator for the Public Programs Department of the California Institute of Integral Studies, a nonprofit university in San Francisco. Now, let me first introduce our presenters, Calvin Baker and Sherri Taylor, and then we'll get right to the conversation. Sherri Taylor is a contemplative scholar, consultant, and facilitator. She earned her master's and doctoral degrees from the Wright Institute in Berkeley, California. Dr. Taylor teaches in the Clinical Psychology Doctoral Program at the Wright Institute and curates group trainings, play shops, and workshops for community and professional audiences in the areas of anti-racism, diversity and inclusion, cultural humility, the cultivation of joy and creativity, dream work, and spirituality. Calvin Baker is the author of 4 novels, including Grace and Dominion, which was a finalist for the Hurston Wright Award. He teaches in Columbia University's Graduate School of the Arts and is also taught at Yale University, the University of Leipzig, Long Island University, Bard College, and Middlebury College. His nonfiction work has appeared in Harper's and the New York Times Magazine. He currently resides in New York City. And now, let me turn it over to Sherri and Calvin. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you for having me, Jason. Sherri, it's great to be here. I'm excited for our conversation this evening.
Same. So let's get into it. But first, my signature, Calvin, is always to just take a moment and set an intention. Surprise, right? Because this feels like a big moment to have this conversation, you know. So just, yeah, think about what we hope to kind of manifest in this conversation, what kind of quality of participation we want to bring. And then we'll start. So I'm so glad to have this conversation with you, and our listeners may not know, but we had an earlier conversation, but I wanted to just start with getting some background. You know, how does a young person growing up in Chicago, right, come to be fascinated with, you know, sort of constructions of American identity and post-colonialism and, you know, kind of interweaving all of these things with geography and history, right? Can you just tell me a little bit about the trajectory, you know, how we got here to this book, to this first nonfiction piece?
Wow, thank you for that question. There's a lot in there.
Of course.
I've been working on these issues and thinking about this for a long time. And in the beginning, the very first question I had, and the question I had when I was working on my first novel was, what is my country? In all the ways that you can consider that. What is this place? What is it to me? Who am I within it? And it quickly, and once you start teasing that, you start to see how that it's very textured. America is, it's the place that we know, it's a land that we tell ourselves is inclusive, right? It's the most powerful country in the world.
Right.
It begins as one of the outposts of the British Empire, and still contains elements of, right, the colonial ways that India was created, that Nigeria was created, that Jamaica and Barbados. And so you have all these things going on. And I said about many people say like, oh, you've been writing about race for 20 years. Like, I've been writing about a multicultural society.
Right.
And what that means, and asserting the fact that this country has always been that. And what's in play now, as in the beginning, are the terms of that shared space.
Right. The terms of that shared space. So, you know, I'm going to have to rein myself in, because even in you saying that, it made me wonder at what point did you realize that you know, your experience was not you know what I mean, was not a part of what the country, your country had in mind. Do you know what I mean? Like growing up as a young Black person, there's that moment where you're like, oh.
So there are two moments.
Uh-huh.
One of them is when you say that,
Mm-hmm.
right? As you say that question, it reinforces that fact. And I think part of my program, if you will, part of my project is rejecting that fact. Amen. Because who is anyone to tell me, like, who is any other adult, who is any other, right, to tell me who I am in the place I'm from and to dictate to me what I may be. And so my life is lived positively according to those things that move me, that motivate me, that I dream about, that I aspire to, that I fear, that, right, all those human things and passions that move us all.
Right.
It becomes complicated when it's contested. And so the second part of your question is, when did I first understand it would be contested?
Yeah.
Fantastic question. And okay, two answers to that. Everything has multiple answers.
I know.
One of the reasons I've been waiting to have this conversation is when I talk to you, I was like, oh, Sherri, there's a level here and a level here and a level here and a level here. And we're going to get into all of them tonight. And one of them is just realizing, I think differently. And so by the fact that I had a realization when I was maybe 10 years old that my mind worked in ways that other minds didn't necessarily work.
Right.
In a very strong sense that, I'm not going to have a normative life. And that wasn't a race moment. That was simply about who I am.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And when does the race moment happen?
Yeah.
I couldn't tell you the first time, but it happens every day. It happens in white space. It happens. And one of the things I tried to get across in this book, and this is important about who all of us are, as well as the conversation that we all purport to be having. And there's a self in private. And this goes back to Immanuel Kant. We can get off into Kant later, but, and there's a public self.
Right. Ooh.
And when we're hanging out in a space like this, sort of oblivious to who may be listening and just, Calvin and Sherri talking, or Calvin alone. And this is something, you said something to me in an earlier conversation. We are all alone, and people have a hard time accepting that fact. Right. And that happens, that's a very deep level, but there's a level, a very common level. It's like, okay, I have a private space and a private self, what I do in my home, what I'm like with my family and my friends. Right. And that's one thing. And then who I am in public. Right. Right. As as citizen and then as Black body.
Yeah. You know what? So this is a perfect segue, because I'm actually seeing that's a whole other conversation around integration, right? The public and, I said it.
Yes.
You feel me? Okay. So let's just move Let's move into some of the book. Because again, everyone, I really recommend that you buy the book. I'm someone that does this work, sort of DEI, and we'll touch on that later, because I know we have some ideas about it. But it's really brought me into some important questions around how I want to be showing up in this moment. So thank you for that. But so just to give folks a little bit of an overview. So you trace kind of this conversation in the United States, right? And you kind of have these moments, like the Continental Congress, and then the Civil War, civil rights, and then now, right? It's sort of, there's these 4 points. And what you're what I understood, like the main thesis, right, is that the revolution isn't complete, right, from back in the day.
That's right. And it is, and the reason it wasn't complete is the most contentious point at founding was that of slavery.
Right.
And we write in the Constitution, the first Constitution, and people bend over backwards to not say slavery in the Constitution, as people bend over backwards to not say certain words now. However, and there were people who meant this deeply, including delegates who said, I will not sign a document that includes the word slaves, including Thomas Paine of the Federalist Papers, who says, let the South go their own way, we don't need them. But you have these powerful economic forces. I mean, one of the things, I've worked a lot with American history.
Yeah.
And one of the things that becomes, as a novelist, and one of the things that becomes clear is not only that history repeats itself, but human nature doesn't change. And so you have these points, and that's profound. I want to sit with that for a moment, because
you said that.
One of the most remarkable things, I don't remember who said it, that I've ever heard said about slavery is, it's not like these abstract, these people who are lesser. It's like Calvin and Sherri. And when you go back and you read the works of Acclaimed, those who had voices, you understand what remarkable, amazing people they were. And therefore how weird this is. To go to the main question, the first point at the Continental Congress, people say, all right, we're going to allow slavery now just so we can get support, right? Get everyone on board in this committee meeting that we're having here. And you've got slave owning interests and shipping interests from Boston and New York. And we need to cobble everyone together so we can wage this audacious war against the English.
Right.
Everyone knew, or a great many people knew, including Jefferson, who I'm fascinated with, and I talk about in the book, only because he is the most conflicted man I've ever come across in all of literature and all of history. And it leads directly to the Civil War, which is the second possibility and second moment. And by historians of the period, it's known as the Second American Revolution. As the first revolution knew, slavery is the untenable compromise. And all of those years the Civil War didn't simply erupt. You're fighting over the issue of slavery every step of the way, every presidential election, every new state that you allow into the Union. This is the issue. It's the thing. And so finally, the war happens. And the war had been presaged, it had been in the air for 50 years by the time it happened. And one of the remarkable conversations that happens are those between Frederick Douglass and Abraham Lincoln, two remarkable men. And Lincoln begins as a typical centrist liberal, trying to hold the line, trying to accommodate the South, and slowly moves toward war. And then as he's moving toward emancipation, and Douglass says something profound that Lincoln would come to accept. And it's, ending slavery is only the beginning. Right. After the slave trade ends, and I want to walk through the whole thing, and then we'll come back. After it ends, as James Baldwin said in one of his final public appearances, they made no provisions for those people whatsoever. And you see any other people who have suffered war and abuse and trauma, if you go and you understand that nation building has to happen. That did not happen in this country. And as soon as the 13th, 14th, 15th Amendments are passed, they're immediately attacked. The South reconstitutes itself in this thing we call Jim Crow. And you get to the third phase, which is, so you have emancipation, And then you have, and then you have desegregation,
Right.
which is another passive, reactive term. And it was powerful and it was mighty, but you see, you're coming from so far back, what you're asking for, and desegregation is a polite term to say
Right.
abject oppression in every possible way. And it's the 1960s when that becomes, right, when legal segregation is abolished. That's in living memory.
Mm-hmm.
That's in living memory. And then you come to the third phase that I call integration. Again,
Right.
it was the original prescription.
Right.
We've only been in a moment since the 60s, the Civil Rights Act of 1964, and you have 15 years of active measures before the right wing gains enough power to push back against it.
Right.
And everything they do is in opposition to the Civil Rights Act. And
Absolutely.
we forget that and we bend over backwards to come up with other explanations for what's going on here.
Right, right. So, and as you're talking, I'm thinking about just the difference between desegregation and integration, right? So desegregation, right, is a first step, but integration is that, that we were talking about, that it's like the path to true reconciliation, like that sort of the sovereignty aspect of it, like what that whole project of a democratic society would be,
And one of the things that has struck me very powerfully as I've been talking about this book and presenting over the last 3 weeks is people are dumbstruck. And when I say, well, we have to integrate those who are excluded from opportunity in this country into the full promise of America. And everyone says, how do we do that? Well, we did it with the Germans. We did it with the Italians. We did it with the Jews. We did it with every European group that's ever come over. And we did it with things like the New Deal, with things like the GI Bill, right? And so you're creating wealth through housing. You're making pathways to education. You're building land grant universities. Black people are excluded from all of those things. But that is, and Ira Katznelson is the great scholar of this. But Black people are excluded, right? If you look at the New Deal, Southern Democrats tell Roosevelt, "You're not going to get this if we can't exclude Blacks from it."
People.
And now we come to this point where there have been all these advances in American material well-being, in American technology, and at each step, Americans find a way to exclude Black people. And so the problem remains.
Right. Because let's talk about chapters 5, 6, and 7, because that's where I literally wrote in the book when I got there. I was like, oh, come through, because you kind of
talk to me.
You kind of get into exactly this, right? That it's like we're playing dumb somehow we don't know how to do this. This is so hard. It's like, but we've done it. So what's really the difference? And also the fact then that the way that the discourse around Black people has been set up is that it's all about the inner work, right? It's all about, take a deep breath. It's all about, we've got to, like, I don't know. I don't even have a word for it, but it seems it's very much invested in the interior life. And I think, one of the things that we talked about, right, is that we can't, it's like, that's a Sisyphean, ordeal. Like, we can't police people's psyches, we can't make people believe X, Y, or Z or not feel a way. Does that make sense?
That it makes astounding sense, and I'll point out two things. The first iterations of the civil rights movement, beginning with the abolitionists and continuing through Dr. King, it's a campaign of moral suasion. And for a country that professes Christianity, though Christianity itself is captured by slavery in America, it simply is, the stances that it took. Morally, you're a minister, you know this better than I. And the gains that and so you come to like the late stage of the Civil Rights Act, you know, the Civil Rights Movement, the Black Panthers, Malcolm X, and it's then that you enter this language of stone cold reason because moral suasion had reached its limits. And now we're engaged in a kind of moral the self-help movements, as I call them. And it's like, if only I try hard enough, then I can escape this. You can't escape it because it produces you. You only can't, and these movements, they're tautological, and it's larger than you. And so, and it's larger than me, and it produces me. And so when you say, if you do this, it's a magic wand. And I remember voting, when I went to vote for Obama in 2008, all of my neighbors, I was living in the neighborhood of, my neighbors, majority European descendant. And there's a sense of elation for them, and they wanted to do, they felt, you could also tell, but there was also the sense of absolution, that this one act solves everything. And we've moved from there to this, this campaign, I call them like the South Beach diets for racism. And you see that's not going to solve anything. At best, you're an unreliable narrator of your own, which I think these things adequately point out. In fairness to them, everyone's at a different place, and liberals for too long, and I include progressives in this, have had a willful blind spot when it comes to race. And we've gone through a theater of racial awakening that begins in the Great Awakening itself, And these are the years that lead up to the Revolution. And it's the first time Americans are really, because slavery happened, it happened jurisdiction by jurisdiction, it happened piecemeal, 150 years in, at the time of the Continental Congress, you have a race problem. And people realize in that founding generation, we have a race problem. Something has went wrong here. And de Tocqueville says, if this country fails, it will be because of race. And so you have all these early witnesses to this, profound witnesses to this.
They saw it coming.
And then we forget. And then
we though?
People claim, because you can, I will say this, if you write a history book that privileges a Confederate point of view or writes out African-American points of view, if you live in a suburb that is all white, or a neighborhood in the city, and you move from a white neighborhood to a white university to a white employer, in a white friend group, and you can actually claim, I did not know, even though there are 400 years of history that you should know about, especially as an educated person, but these are things that you're allowed to not know. And this is the pact between whites across the political spectrum. And now we're in a moment where people are claiming again, some of them quite ingenuously, I did not know this. What can I do? Well, you see, you are 400 years behind where you should have been. And we cannot wait for you any longer.
And I think that is the urgency, I think, is something that really I tapped into. And when I was reading this, is really how urgent the moment is, because I do, the narratives that we are sitting in are about, like, there's a lot of learning, we've got to learn, and we've got to unlearn, and people have to have a whole lexicon in order to
and you teach, and that's letting the back of the class run run the curriculum. And if I'm moving as quickly as my slowest student, no one's getting anywhere in this class, and you're doing everyone ultimately a disservice. That person this is remedial stuff, but if the majority is in a remedial place, then for those who aren't, have a duty to lead.
Right.
And some of that leading means puncturing these narratives, these false narratives that we're allowing ourselves to believe. Right? Trump is elected, and people say, I didn't know that it ran so deep.
Real? Yeah, no, that's true. I was about to say, really? And I remember that's totally what happened. Yeah, yeah.
Right. And, or like, oh, why don't, I mean, you can point to any number of things. However, we are also the first generation born after the civil rights movement.
Right.
And that means that there are possibilities in this moment for your life, for my life, for everyone born after 1964 and those who are still young then, who are not entirely produced by segregation.
Right. Right.
To demand something more.
Right. Okay. So.
And that's the finishing of the revolution.
The end. So there was one thing, there was a lot of things, but there was one thing that I'm still sitting with. And again, this is that part where it's encouraged me to rethink how I show up. And it's that you really bring home the point that we can't get away. We're not gonna talk our way out of race and racism because race itself is I can't even, what am I trying to, like, it's the ultimate, like what I say, it's the ultimate master's tools can't dismantle the master's house. Like, right, we need it. There's a way that we've locked ourselves into it, and it's
the container we're in, right?
Yeah.
And everyone, and so and that's why we talk about these things that we both have short patience for. I didn't know, and or I'm here, or I mean better, or I like blah, blah. Like that's rhetoric. And so let's move beyond the rhetoric and let's ask, as we would in any other context, how do you solve the problem? And we talk about all the problems of race and they're perennial and American awakening is cyclical. The only thing that has improved the situation, those 8 years after the Civil War, called Reconstruction, and those 15 years after the passage of the Civil Rights Act, before the right wing, which is, again, these are the people who were against the Civil Rights Act. So everything, right, the Republican Party, just everything they do say, okay, these are the people who are against the Civil Rights Act. In many cases, it's the same people. All this is in living memory. Yep. This is their covert campaign. Nixon gave everyone a language to not say N-word. So instead you say tough on crime, taxes.
You say law and order, right? Which is that's the echo today. Right, we've got federal troops being sent in, and campaign, these campaign commercials where it's an elderly white woman and her home is being broken into by a shadowy, dark figure. I mean, you can't.
All this is there's a straight line. There's a straight line from that to the antebellum South, and just a direct line, and it's still around us.
Right.
The 15 years after the passage of the Civil Rights Act, and the important thing to remember about the Civil Rights Act, because we talk about crime, we talk about policing, you have to remember that every site in society is policed. Race is made in three basic sites: the hard sites of government and economics, the cultural sites of media, education. This is where you're learning your narratives of selfhood and nation.
Right. Representation, all of that.
And then personally and interpersonally. And as well as and so you have housing and you have public space. So the neighborhoods, everyone lives in a segregated neighborhood in America. People go to segregated schools. And New York public school, American public schools as a whole are as segregated now as they were in the 50s. And because there have been concerted campaigns to keep them so.
Yeah.
And they don't call themselves Jim Crow anymore. They call themselves by any number of other names. The agenda is the same. In a brief period from 64 to about 1980, when everyone voted for Reagan, and which gives the right wing this incredible power to start reshaping things. Because again, it's an economic pact between white conservatives and white liberals.
Right.
And so, and it's right because Carter did too much. Everyone's, Carter's still a pariah. Reagan's still a hero. They're fighting about civil rights. They're fighting about civil rights. Never lose sight of that. And until that moment, you have movement, and you have the greatest increase of African Americans in the middle class this country's ever seen.
Yeah.
It became too much, and so that's what they were against. Just as Barack Obama's victory, symbolic as it was in many ways, was too much. And people that they've come too far.
Oh yeah.
They've done enough.
Yeah, the pendulum swung all the way. All the way to the other side.
I don't think the pendulum swung. I think there was a desperation. And a desperation that says, we can take off the gloves now. We are in a life and death fight for the Confederacy, for the white supremacist state.
This is what I think, this is where you and I went with like this idea of like that psychic space of how, we were talking about the country sort of being sick, and more so, dare I say, spiritually sick, soul sick. And just thinking about that, because that's exactly it. The fact that that's sort of the, in psychological terms, that's the level of regression. It goes to life and death. It goes to, I'm gonna be annihilated.
It goes to money. It goes to, it is because whiteness is, as I call it in the book, it's not rational. It is an irrational belief system. Ooh. It is a religion. It gives people a sense of who they are, and some of it is you're not inculcating people into Americanness. You're inculcating them into whiteness.
Yep.
You're telling them no matter what, and whiteness is constructed against blackness. So you create public sport. You have baseball stadiums. Well, guess who can't play? You go to a theater to you go to watch a show. David Nassau writes about this brilliantly. And you go to a theater, and what are you watching? You're watching minstrel shows. And minstrel shows. Here's one of the remarkable things about America. It's the extent to which our technology moves these tropes forward. And so we're ever telling ourselves we're technologically advanced, we're so far seeing. You invent a locomotive that connects one coast to another, and what do? You segregate the train cars. You invent moving pictures, and what do you put on? Things like darkies doing a dance.
Right.
You create which is a real title of one of Edison's talkies. It was a silent. You create advertising that lets you sell goods in open markets. And what are you selling everything? What? Aunt Jemima and Uncle Ben. And you're still doing this. You're still doing this. And it morphs in it, but the terms are white control of blackness. And another question that I get very often is, and I want to come back, right? Because
Is what?
No. Because we're talking about this soul sickness. We're talking about that lets you allow and embrace the most rapacious form of capitalism on earth. And why are you doing, and lets you destroy social safety networks because, well, who's that for? But welfare queens and Cadillacs. And
right.
we tell ourselves these things. And what was the final point tonight? I forgot. I
We're talking. I get so excited when I'm talking.
I get so excited when I'm talking because
I love it.
But I'm going to slow down.
It's okay. I mean, part of me wanted to say, that's it. That's what we need to do right there, right?
Well,
want to be like, because I'm just when you're talking, I'm thinking about like all of these performative gestures that came after George Floyd and folks taking a knee and wearing kente cloths, and it's like nobody asked for that. There's clear things, right, that Black people have been asking for since 40 Acres and a Mule.
Go back to the Civil Rights Act, address the sites of voting, of education, of housing, and of employment, right? Those are your key sites. Mm-hmm. So yes, there needs to be police reform, but that is not enough. That is too low an ask. And I do not want to sit here and, right, the calendar turns to November, turns to January, and there's been a Democratic victory or even a Democratic sweep of legislative bodies, and people celebrate. Now everything's going to be fine. It's not going to be fine unless we keep making demands. Now you need partners in Washington. You need partners in your state house. You need partners in government, but they do what the people want them to do and what they demand of them. And if we are serious about this, we're going to make concerted demands upon them.
That's making me recall in our earlier conversation, when I asked about, so how does all of this work for our indigenous kin, right? Because this is, on top of it, we all on stolen land. So how does that work? And what you said was that, well, right, it's like there's the right to refuse, the right to say, I don't want no part of this,
And so you have me fired up. I'm rarely, people who know me, like Calvin runs cool. And tonight I'm feeling it.
Okay.
So it's two things. And when I talk about integration, it applies to everyone.
Yeah.
Right. Black people, because of the ways race is constructed, but I mean simply and solely, everyone deserves full access to participate in this democracy, and further to participation to help shape it.
Right.
It's true of Black people, it's true of Latinos, it's true of gays and lesbians, it's true everyone. Everyone. Native Americans, even people we disagree with, right? And so if everyone participates and you have a disagreement, that's an honest disagreement. It's not as opposed to a gerrymandered white nationalist state.
Right.
When it comes to, and here's the, I had to think about this, and here's the tricky thing about Native Americans and about, when I say integration, some people will hear assimilation, which I don't mean.
Right.
I mean that one has the right to be accepted as one is. And in the case of Indigenous people, the ways in which they were colonized were not simply the brutal ways that we know of, trails of tears, stolen land, dispossession, but also a concerted attempt to assimilate them to Europeans.
Boarding schools and stuff.
Which and you see, and again, all of these patterns, like you see the same thing in Australia, right? So everything that you see in America, you see in another part of the former British Empire or the Spanish Empire. And the right to, you're like, oh, well, we are in stolen land. This country begins, we talk about the original sin of slavery. There's another sin that gets lost sight of because those massacres were so, this is the wrong word, but effective in their aims. And so you have a right to, I do think Native Americans have rights of sovereignty, and which include the right to refuse this culture altogether, or to participate as they so elect. I think everyone else, you have to participate and hash out what that means. Yeah.
So this is like probably not the best segue, but there's a couple questions that I had, because in chapter 6, there's the death of the civil rights movement. I really was struck by, the conversation about leadership, leaders of movements, right? And how our government, how the American government, how the United States government responds to those folks that truly might be able to ignite something, right? The Fred Hamptons of the world, the Malcolm X's, the Martin Luther King Juniors,
Medgar Evers, Angela Davis, and
right. And just wanted to hear from you, like, what are you, because at this moment we're in now, like, what do you think about leadership and movements? Because there's kind of a decentralized thing that's happening now, which is very exciting and interesting, right? That there is no identifiable leader.
So I have complex thoughts about that. And fair enough. And one of them is, I wrote this book because one of the things that happens when you annihilate the leaders of one generation, there's a certain amount of knowledge that is not passed on. And so, and there's in some ways, a generation gap between the people who taught us and the younger people. And one of the things that you do is hold space and say, well, this is effective and this is buried and this is unknown and these tactics work. And so I wanted to go through the history of the civil rights movement connected to all of these different eras in American history, but also these different usually segregated subject matter areas. And offer that to people so that they have a toolkit, a blueprint in which they can apply this learning to whatever sites that they wish.
Right.
That's A. And so to the extent that it's desegregated, one has to live with it. And however, at some point, there has to be a real coming together. And I've heard it said that we're in the largest moment of mass mobilization in history, which I'd always thought of as the civil rights movement. And so if we are in fact mobilizing now, we have to make sure that we're asking for the right things, that our eyes are on the prize. We have to understand that we don't have to make this up. Right? There's a blueprint that produces us. And so when we talk about, and this is a point from earlier that I lost, when we say things are bad, and Obama says something like, well, if you go and talk to a Black man from the general South and ask him if things are like, yes, they're better because of integration. That is the only thing that has worked. It became politically anathema, and no one talks about it, right? And so you say it, or you say affirmative action, and people are like, you can't say that, you can't say that, you can't say. Why? Because it worked and it was made politically toxic. That was their campaign.
Right. Yeah, because affirmative action works.
It works. And it's why, like, we live in a state now, like 90% of people claim to support the principles of equality, of fairness, of diversity, of inclusion. 20 to 30%, depending on the metric, support programs that lead to change that have been proven to be effective. And so, we can rebrand them. We can call it equity. We can call it inclusion, or we can call it integration. I'm not invested in rhetoric here. I'm invested in a blueprint, a vision, and a path forward.
Thank you for saying vision, because I think that's kind of where we landed, in that way of thinking about what the present owes the past, and this vision for the future. And one of the questions, that we were sitting with, and that I keep wrestling with, and I'm gonna get you back in it too, is that, what is the role of the creative right now, right? You're, a writer, the role of musicians. There's this little mini video going around of John Lewis talking about how important music is to a movement. And in fact, then you talk about Notorious B.I.G. and how that, hearing him, really shaped you and kind of started transforming your consciousness. That's really amazing. So what now, Calvin?
And so there were a number of people, and again, I actually began that chapter with Public Enemy. And the first time I heard Public Enemy, and what Public Enemy was doing, all they were doing was bringing forward the teachings of Malcolm X into the 90s. Right. And as people who witnessed that and giving that moment a language for change, for resistance, a sense of history, connectedness to the elders, to these visionary people. And what artists are supposed to have, leaders are supposed to have 50, 100-year visions. That's what you do. And I'm not talking about commercial art or things that like might go viral. That's a different thing. But the real art, the art that has lasted, the visions that have lasted were intended to last. And if you go back to the philosophers of democracy, if you go back to Kant, who was a racist, by the way, but Kant has this notion. It's like, oh, this is an idea so powerful. It's destined to encapsulate all of humanity. Right. And up until and there's a time, even recently, when you have these neocon wars to spread democracy. Now, you're not doing it at home, but you're still somehow invested in this idea, this Kantian or Rousseauian, wherever you dial in, that democracy is the way people are supposed to live. I don't know if that's the fate of the entire world. Other people have other ideas, but it should be the fate of America. And that shouldn't be a hard sell, and that shouldn't be seen as idealistic. And we have seen enough evidence of it. You have a Sherri Taylor sitting there. You have all these amazing leaders, all these people who are in fact produced by integration. They should not be the exception. It should be the norm.
It should be the norm. Right. Right. So how do we, what do you say to how to connect people to that vision, right? Because it's not just the creatives. That's the one thing that you and I were talking about, we agreed on, right? Like everybody has that capacity, right? So that imagination, right? That ability to hold a vision.
It's a fundamental fact of the human.
Isn't it? I think so.
We are all creative. We all have a sense of creativity. Some people have cultivated theirs to greater extent. Some people, just like we can all count, we can all dream, and we can all connect to each other's dreams and spirits. And one of the things the book is, it's intellectual, but it's also very felt.
Oh no, you hit a spiritual tone. I caught it.
Because it's a belief system. Yeah. Right. Race is a belief system. And as long as we're talking about race and how do we get out of race, then we're still talking about racial belief systems. We're still privileging it. We're still reinforcing it. Every time I hear white privilege, the first thing I hear is white, me as whiteness. And what do I have to do as a white person without giving up my whiteness to not feel guilty, it's like, you can't. Right. You actually have to give that up, because what does it mean? It is an invention. It is an absolute fundamental myth. Invention.
Right.
And what do I have to do as an American? What is the dream for what this country is? And this is what I've been working on for my entire career. It is meant to be an inclusive, multicultural space. And if the world isn't free, this should be a place where everyone in it is, and where everyone has opportunity. There's no, I mean, I could push it further and say, there's no reason there should be poor people in America. We have, but I'm not, I'm leaving out the pure economic critiques right now to ride my own hobby horse, which is race, because so much reduces to that. So many crimes are committed in the name of that. And I can wave a magic wand and say, the only people who need help right now during COVID are people of color. And everyone will say, okay, we don't need help, right? Like you create these narratives of race that, and everyone stays in their lane. You have to reject that. And I mean, people have known this. People know these things, right? So there are two things. You go back to the past in order to imagine the future. You're learning the history. You think of a great painter. You think of a great musician. You look at everything. You listen to everything, and you say, "What is it that we need right now?" You have to turn the frame conceptually just a little bit. Don't talk about race. Ask yourself, how integrated is this space? We were joking earlier during the sound check about. I have to come back to this.
Come on.
This is real and material, and I made a joke about San Francisco, which wasn't a joke, and it's the observation that whenever I'm there, I'm struck by the profound number of homeless people of color sleeping on the streets in this phenomenally wealthy place, a phenomenally sophisticated place filled of some of the best educated people in this country.
Right.
And so if you're produced by that, if that is your data, and that would have been a reality for someone in the 19th century, right? These people who are materially impoverished, we therefore began to look at as lesser than. We hold a distance, we view charitably, if at all, and not as human beings.
Right.
In a nation where sovereignty belongs to the people, everyone is sovereign. That homeless person is sovereign. Now you can reject that and say, well, I've done this and this and this. Like, I'm Sherri Taylor, I went to Stanford, I've done all these amazing things, and I'm better than that. Which many people do.
Yep, they do.
But again, it's when you that's the first separation of self from another. And race is the ultimate one. Once you create these, this is where I get a little esoteric, and I don't want to. I love it. Go. You better go. You better go. You better go. Once I separate myself from you, I'm also separating myself from me. And I'm allowing all of these things done in my name. That's when I can say, oh, I didn't know. I didn't know, because I'm a person divided. Ooh. How can you walk down the street and see all that suffering and say, I did not know? It is everywhere. It is everywhere. It is everywhere.
Right. So what's really going on? Right.
That's right.
That it's possible. Because that's all, the paradox is that, and for that person that says, I didn't know, there's a certain kernel of truth in that, right?
Because you're produced by a place that's meant to keep those people out, because you're educated in places meant to keep those people, scare quotes, out, because you work in a place that actively keeps those people out, literally and figuratively.
Right.
And you don't see them. No. You don't see them. And then you have a moment of awakening when the people rise up, when the people recognize their sense, their collective power and energy. Right. And they say, we want something different. And you say, I didn't know. Well, that's slow walking. Right, because now I'm supposed to stop and explain to you all the things that you didn't know. There's a library of books. There's a library of books, and I spend the first 50 pages of this book saying, okay, here are all the things you didn't know. Now let's move on. Now we've got another 200 pages of stuff. Now you know that. That's like, remember last semester, oh, you didn't learn this, and this, and this, and this, and this. And we're not going to play this theater of awakening again. We're going to assume that everyone is knowledgeable, intelligent, can learn. Here's the information. Now, if you are serious, what do you do with it?
Right. Well, and I think that's back to the sort of esoteric piece. It's like the learning and the awareness is meant to trigger a transformation of consciousness. And that is meant to trigger action.
Correct. Exactly.
But where we get stuck in
our own consciousness. We get stuck in our own psychology.
Ooh.
Or our collective psychologies.
No, you said it. That's it. Right. And I think this is where we get to, right? Because if we, like you said, if we strip it all away, right? Because that's the so provocative for me is that what does it mean to give up race? What would that mean?
And
to give up the function of race, right? Because clearly, like maybe there's distinctions in skin tone and this, that, but to give up the way that it functions.
Everyone wants to. That's what they mean when they say, when the Supreme Court pretends that we live in a colorblind society, when a liberal says, I don't see color, everyone wants it to go away. Everyone wants us to, right, when you go and you vote for Barack Obama and Michelle Obama and you look down your nose at regular Black folks, everyone wants this to go away, right? When you go out and you buy a bunch of books and maybe you read them, maybe you don't. It's also important to remember when you're doing these things that a lot of the frames that these conversations are being shaped by at the moment are corporate frames. And so, right, when you talk about when you talk about a book, you're talking about a product. And no, I want to draw myself in because I can't. And so, even though I think this book is doing something differently, of course, even though I think this book is radical, of course, even though I think this book offers a new paradigm, it's still being presented. There's a corporate machine that goes like Calvin Baker's written a book about race. I will see it in windows about race in places where there isn't a lot of diversity, and it's performing, and people will take it or not take it as right. That's only a book. It's only a book. Yeah. And there are things, and this is why I say we've come to a moment that are greater than rhetoric, if we want it.
If we want it.
This is about action. And to your point earlier, the rhetoric inspires consciousness, inspires action. The only thing I want to say is this is the correct action in this. And this is what we've lost sight of because we're so busy looking at our feet. We have to look out here, look at these things that started working, do more of them, theorize them, right? Take them into your place of business, into your place of worship, into your family, into your school, and work on that. Look around yourself and say, how integrated is this space?
How integrated is this space? Not how diverse, right? Not how multicultural.
Not how multicultural, because we can achieve, like, that's a show. That's a dressing.
Yeah. Oh yeah. It could be multicultural enough,
There are 100 million, I don't want to, there's something, I know that there are 30 million Black people living in poverty in this country. And I think there are 100 million Americans in total. And someone out there can fact check that, but I'm pretty sure those are the numbers.
Yeah.
How is that possible? Well, it's because of those 30, because you say, well, poverty is a Black thing. Poverty is a brown thing. And then you have, and then if you're a white person in poverty, you're like, well, at least I'm not Black or brown. That's the narrative. And we all know that's what people say in private.
Right.
Right? And now we're just saying it all in public, and it's good to get it out there.
We're saying it all in public.
But we also have to say the things that we say in closed doors. The
Right.
things, I mean, I love this conversation because it's like talking to a friend, and I'm not dumbing anything down. I'm not, right? It's
know, yeah.
like, we're just being real. And
Yeah.
we know that this works.
Right. I mean, it's so, okay. You know what? I mean, there's a part of me that read this and like wanted to like just drop it because I was like, it's so, you know, because it's, you know, full circle back, and then we'll move into our Q&A, is that what you just said, right, at the very beginning, was that history has also sort of shown you that there's something about human nature that also, I want to say, is resistant to change. I don't want to say that it doesn't change, but you know.
Right. But this is the story of our lives. I mean, that's the sneaky autobiographical element of the book. And I extend myself in ways in this book that I never have before.
Mm-hmm.
This is what creates me. This is what allows me to know all of this. It's because I had all this opportunity.
Right. Right. Calvin, thank you so much. I mean, what a conversation. Okay, so.
Sherri, thank you. Sherri, thank you.
We don't get. I got the closing questions though. So
all right, when this is over, just come to the house on a Sunday.
I love it. I love it. Okay, so we have some questions in the chat, and I'm gonna read them. So Rona is asking, what are your perspectives, thoughts on the impact of individual and collective and multi-generational trauma inflicted upon Black, Indigenous people and people of color?
I think this is your area of expertise.
I think trauma is everybody's expertise, right?
So,
we all got it.
Here, we all have it. This nation is created in trauma. This nation is created, like, people who've been uprooted from, like, people who've left one place and come to another place. I read about this in Dominion, and that is the fundamental American truth, wherever you're coming from, except Northern Native Americans. Everyone else is left a country, left a family, and come here. The Black experience of that is involuntary. Mm-hmm. That's what makes it extra traumatic. But we've gotten this far, and this is where I become Protestant. We all have trauma. You're not so traumatized that you can't move forward. And that you can't claim sovereignty of the self, mm-hmm. and of your own spirit, of your own desires, of your own goals. Yeah. As an individual, and this goes back to what you said when we were talking, but that hit me hard. We are all alone. Yep. No one is more powerful than you. No one is better than you. And you are your own medicine. Yes. And even we have all these teachers,
have medicine, right? You have medicine. Yeah. You have medicine. You know, that's one of the things we were talking about, and I'll just add, one of the things I said to you, and I'll say it publicly, is that, as someone who's worked with trauma, whatever that means, I find myself, I've grown weary of talking about trauma. Right. Again, I'm trying to really figure out what does Octavia Butler say? That, there's nothing new under the sun, but there are new suns. I'm out here searching for new suns. So I'm interested in how to lead with joy, because don't get me started, Calvin. See, you got me worked up now.
No,
so.
start.
No, it's like what we were talking about. It's like joy is the container for your participation. So it can hold everything. I think people, we get joy confused with happiness and all this kind of stuff, but joy is about like the robustness, right, of your participation, of your participation in you, like what you were just saying, right?
That's
your
right.
And that's when I think about my ancestors, our ancestors who survived. Right, not just survived, but kept their humanity intact, even as they were moving through the nightmare of chattel slavery. They tapped into something. right? They tapped into an identity that was not transcended their race. It was like, they went to the place where God lives. So don't get me, like I said, this is what I think about, right? It's that the true identity, right?
That's right. And you're connected to that. And I will tell you this, like, what does a book do? A book is a story, right? Like the kinds of books that I write are stories.
Love it.
What do these stories do? They are meant to orient you. It's really that simple, right? It's a system of meaning making. It's meant to orient you. It orients you toward your society. It orients you toward that which is larger, right? Your place in the universe. It orients you toward the self.
Yes.
And so, right, and these are the things, and we do this piecemeal in other aspects of our lives. That's what a book does uniquely. And so it's a kind of medicine. Spirituality is a medicine, right? These things aren't, spirituality is built of narratives and, right, there's a shared border there.
Yeah. I love that storytelling, right? And just back to that, the creatives and just storytelling as it's it's like a thin space. You create a thin space when
that's beautiful. Yeah.
Right? And it's like, so anything can come, it's like a sort of magical kind of thing, or more conjuring. Okay. All right.
We better keep reading it. That's beautiful.
Okay, so I'm going to go, let's see. Hannah is asking, and I hope that was correct, could be Hannah or Hannah, regarding racial integration, what would be the ideal issues you would like politicians to focus on a national and local level?
It is the Civil Rights Act of 1964.
We're still there.
We want, no, it's not that we're there. We move forward. They pushed back. So pull back all of their rhetoric. You go, right, this begins, Ford passes the act, the next president's a Republican, Nixon. Nixon's running against it. He creates a coalition, a suburban, and we talk about the southern part of that coalition. We don't talk about the suburbs who accept Nixon as long as he doesn't basically say the N-word like his opponent George Wallace was. That's odious. But you see, if you were in Westchester, if you're in parts of the Bay, one doesn't say those things. They're unseemly, they're undignified, they're impolite, they're uncivil.
Right.
And so you elect people like Nixon, you elect people who will achieve the same goals while abiding normative bourgeois codes of conduct. All Trump did was break it. There's nothing in he's done some things that are just wackadoodle, but there's nothing in his primary political philosophy, in any of his policies, that doesn't comport with what the Republican Party has always been about. And so to the question, what do we want our leaders to focus on? Voting rights, education, still unevenly funded, still massively unequal outcomes, focus on the outcomes, anything, right? And one of the, like, when I talk about education, people are like, oh, we want to study what's broken about Black and brown kids. Assume the system's broken. The whole thing. That's right. Because if I took my car to a mechanic and it wasn't fixed, you're like, oh, it's a perfectly fine car. I know the car, it's a fine car. There's something wrong with the mechanic. And so you focus on outcomes, right? And so, and Republicans have tried Bush tried some version of this, I think was well-meaning, but backfired. But again, they're going to be misfires, and you take them and you learn from them. Right. I think one should abolish testing when it comes to access to higher education. And because that is, again, that's on the table as far as they're thinking about doing away with the SATs and things like that. It's happening piecemeal. Like California's leading on that. Keep leading, y'all. So you have to look at housing. Yep. And right now we are on the verge of a massive housing crisis. But we were in a housing crisis before that. Prior to that, who did not have access to decent housing, but also housing is segregated. And one of one of the phenomenon, again, I hate to pick on San Francisco. I could pick on, I'll pick on Brooklyn. I'll pick on Brooklyn. I'll take it to the other coast. And one of the things that's happened as suburbs are created essentially by developers and GI bills that allow people to make these low down payment, take low down payment mortgages that are backed by the federal government that then start creating wealth for white people after the riots of 67, 68, or 68, 69, white flight to them. And now you have a generation that's grown up in these all white spaces, moving into the cities, displacing people and using language of displacement. The governor or the mayor, Cox, who started it in New York, said, come east, be a pioneer. Well, what does a pioneer mean in America?
Okay.
So stop, think about that.
Right.
And so you're coming in, you're displacing people, and you're like, oh, well, it's just housing prices are rising and they can't afford this. Like, why not? Because they've gone to ghetto schools, but they've gotten inferior educations. They've been locked out of the job market, even where the educations have been equal. And you know this. You talk to your cohort. You talk to your I'm going to be real for a minute. You go back and you talk when you talk to your friends from college.
I don't. I'm a hermit.
Okay,
but no, go on.
But when you talk to Black people who are achieving in the mainstream, there's always a point when they say, this happened, right? That people begin to talk about glass ceilings. And so, and these are the invisible things, and they still exist in every facet of this economy. Those have to be broken. And and so you just go down the list. So what do you tell your elected officials to focus on? The whole thing, right? Policing is important, but we're still policing education. We're still policing housing. We are still policing opportunity in this country.
Yes, policing opportunity, all the things. And all the things. And then
all the things. I want all the things.
Well,
at
I
least
just want
15% of all the things.
I want to go back to one of the things that we talked about, because we kind of touched on this in our earlier conversation. And it's that also since when did not having an education become, again, rob you of your okay? You know what I'm saying? It ought to be okay. That's not what everybody's wants to do. It's that sovereignty piece. Right?
That is correct.
So it's not, for me at least, I don't see it as I don't know. I feel like that's so important that that poor is also somehow, I don't know. I just don't like it. I don't like that it's gotten fused with how much dignity you can, your existence, your family, your community can contain, even though we know that's not true, right? Absolutely not true.
People have been stripped of dignity, and some of it has to do with the polarization of wealth in this country. A lot of it does, and there's a lot of liberal blame to be placed for that, as well as Republican blame. Again, it's right across desire lines. However, this is the fundamental fact. And this isn't a political answer, but this is what I believe to be a human truth.
Yeah.
There's no difference between you and me. We are all equal. We are all equal. Certainly in a society like this, we are all equal. We may have different stations. We may have different attainments. We are all equal.
We really, part of me wants to be look at the mess we've made. Yeah, right.
But we're trying to unmake it. So this is our turn. This is our turn. This is our turn. This is our turn. Okay, and this
I know.
We're age mates, as they say. And this is our turn because you. Right, and again, I think everyone has the people in the street, the young people are saying we want change.
Yep.
They don't necessarily know how that happens. They don't necessarily how power works, and they're learning fast, and I applaud everything they're doing. But I've been watching all these movements rise up and get pushed back.
Yeah.
Occupy Wall Street rises up and then nothing happens of it. And the first iteration of Black Lives Matter rises up and nothing material is happening. Certainly, and we can say there's this victory and it's not happening fast enough. We can move faster together.
We can
and
move
so that's
faster
the collectivity.
together. That's the integration piece. Okay, let's see if we have time. We have another question. Yeah, okay. I think so. I haven't gotten a get it together text. So, okay, so Danielle is asking, can you speak to how full self-determination and participation of all African Americans and all other oppressed groups will have an impact on climate change?
No idea, but so I will say this.
Climate change.
I will say this. One of the things that's going on, so this is the two wheels of the conservative movement are racial hatred and rapaciousness of the fossil fuel industry. Yeah. Who funds that? It's a certain group. It's a very small group of people who are making massive donations so they can keep extract value from people, extract value from the earth. That is, in this country, what's behind climate change. And so, it's two parts of a bicycle. And if you don't break the race component of it, then that's what keeps the whole thing balanced. We've got to remember that. That's what there aren't enough people who are resistant to climate change to win office. Right. How do you win office? And Rockefeller invented this playbook, and you need a populist element. Yeah. And what's the populist element? It's like appealing to bigotry. Right. So, it's the Wizard of Oz. Yeah. Yeah. There's something in there about, I'm less, maybe in the material realm sometimes. So, but, when I read that, I think about, this idea of like when being with that essential aloneness, there is something about reverence that takes shape, and I'm just thinking about like reverence for life, right? And for things, and just for that interdependence, right? That we so don't want to tell the truth about, that we absolutely, like you said, we're going to move together, right? That's kind of it. I also want to say something. I don't want to claim that fixing race is going to solve every last problem of the 21st century. But I will tell you this: if you don't fix it, you're not going to fix any of the others, because it's the mass that everything else hides behind. Say it again. No, it is the fundamental. It's the mass that all the rest hides behind. They hold up the shield of race behind which they do whatever they want. And when we say race, it's like it's code too, right? It's coded race language. So let's be clear with, right, that it may not come as like, oh, this is about race. It'll be like you said, it's about law and order, or it's about bringing jobs back from, overseas, or that. I mean, I think they lost the ability to hide it now, but it's I was reading about the Nixon campaign, and I think it was Handelman, one of Nixon's former chiefs of staffs, and he says it, and it gets like you hear him explaining it, and he's breaking it down, and I wish I had the passage here, but you have to read it to get it, because he's basically saying, well, you start in 1962, and you can't say. He just goes there. He just goes there. It's like you can't. And so then you say these things, and then he flips it again, and he's like, so by then it's getting so esoteric, nobody really knows what you're talking about anymore, and it's just right. And so it's becoming. You're like, it doesn't matter what. Everyone knows what it's signifying. Right. Everyone knows what it's like coded. It's coded speech, and it's their own jive, but everyone knows. Right.
Everyone knows. Okay.
Everyone knows.
Thank you. So Christmas presents ask, what are the best themes, values for allies to hold in order to support Black communities, add their resources, then get out of the way so the pros at resilience and resourcing can do their thing?
Read that again.
What are the best themes, values for allies to hold in order to support Black communities, add their resources, then get out of the way so the pros at resilience and resourcing can do their thing? So I guess that's kind of like a how do...
I think you should go and ask the people in your community.
I mean, that's too much like right, Kelvin.
Right?
You know?
Don't.
Yeah.
And I mean, one of the things that I've been saying consistently, the first time I presented this book was to a group of medical professionals, and they are all
interesting.
They were, I mean, highly successful people are like, oh, so what do we do? It's like, you're not empty vessels waiting to be filled. And you can learn, you can understand, like, it sounds like you understand the problem, you have a willingness to change, and don't ask me about it. If you're going to act locally, go ask the people around you. And I want to lead on this, and I've written this book to give you ideas of what my analysis leads me to conclude. And it's important to point that out because people have intuited this before, and I have the receipts now. I know this to be right. And before the book came out, people were like, oh, well, now we're in a pandemic, and you're like, oh, but that's going to play out through race. And now it's all going to play out through race. And so here's the framework, and I stand behind it. I am sure that this is right. What do you do? I mean, at the national level, everyone knows, right? You go and vote, you gather, you protest, you support, right? You support progressive candidates, but you examine the spaces that you're within. You ask your bosses, it's not just right. You're like, oh, why isn't this place of business more diverse, especially in a major metropolitan area? Why isn't, and again, it becomes a little bit different if you're in a rural area, but when you go into a restaurant, like, why isn't this place more diverse? What's going on? I'm participating in all of these segregated spaces. And the question is, how do you opt out of segregated spaces? You almost can't, so you have to integrate them. So what do you do to be a good ally? You go and you integrate the spaces. You open the doors for people. And you learn with humility. As I do and as you do. And this is, you said something earlier to me, there's some points of discomfort. Absolutely. Expect that. Also expect that. It's called learning. I know. That's what it is, right? You learn at your edges. You know, I just want to, you were saying that, and I actually have a quote, you know, because I feel like it's an answer, because it's also a little bit more than that. Because you said that, you know, if we wish to have a democracy of free and equal people, we must be willing to wage war with all tyrants, whether they announce their intentions outright or call themselves friends. So it really, there's something, you know, we got to tip that scale and get past acknowledging, oh, this space is segregated. I now know that. You know what I mean? Like okay. I'm dedicated to change. You know what I mean? I want to say something else true, because as well, because we think this is the South Beach diet, people lose. South Beach diet. I'm just saying, it's like it's self-help. People want to wave a magic wand and have something happen magically. It took 100 years to achieve the original Civil Rights Act. Right. I think we can do this faster. You have to have concrete demands. And everyone has to support them. Right. Who believes in them? So, and this is where and now we're asking a question, well, where does centralization and decentralization happen? And I've come as a thought leader, not a politician, and we do have to ask in a collective way, that these values be respected. And we have to ask them of our government, of our employers, of our educators, of our neighbors, of everything, of our leisure time.
Right.
It's a universal thing.
Right. All right. I think that we have come to the end. Can you believe it? Oh, I'm sad. I keep talking, you know. So, you know, thank you so much, Calvin. I love it. I love it. Do you have any final thoughts? I think you just summed it up, but just in case before we invite Jason back.
Wow, I've said so much tonight, and this is, I mean, this conversation has been. I want to thank you, because this conversation's been such a deep joy. Because yeah, I feel you received the book and in the best spirit of it, and you've just been an amazing reader of it, an amazing partner in. Oh my heavens. Yeah. I received that. Okay. Well, thank you, listeners. This is Calvin Baker. You know, a voice to be heard. And I really want to exhort everyone to like participate. You know, this is the moment. It really is, right? Where we can imagine something different. The whole world is in a thin space. Oh, can I share my intention? I shouldn't. Ooh, I want to share my intention from the top of the hour. My intention from the top of the hour. That was really, really adorable. I just ran up on you. Oh, no, because I love that. It's like, oh, my intention. And it's, I didn't write this book for myself. I wanted to give people something to help them focus their thoughts around this, and also their spirits, and to make real change in this world. That's it. Thank you. Thank you. All right. So Jason, come on back.
All right. Thank you so much for that wonderful talk. It was just not only insightful, but thank you for bringing like your humor and your joy, as you said, Sherri. This is just a wonderful talk to witness and to listen to. So thank you so much, and good night, wherever you are.
Good night.
Thank you all.
And thank you all so much for attending tonight. We hope that you will join us for more of our upcoming events. Our next conversation will be Indigenous Wisdom for Healing Trauma with Sherri Mitchell and Brenda Salgado, August 1st, 11 a.m. Pacific time. We have posted the link in the chat if you want to learn more. This conversation was recorded tonight. If you'd like to watch it again or share it with your community, it can be found at the same link on YouTube or on our Facebook page. We'll also feature this talk on our podcast, which you can find at www.ciispod.com or by searching CIIS Public Programs on your favorite podcast app. Thanks again for joining us, and good night.